What if I told you the first time I trusted my gut was as a freshman in high school in the middle of a Sephora? Welcome to the Trust Your Gut podcast. You know, we live in a world that runs on mostly logic and reason, but I'm here to provide you a roadmap to life using the most ancient and arguably underrated form of wisdom, your gut. This podcast explores all you need to know on how to harness your own intuition through life's highs and inevitable lows. From relationships to parenting, to wealth management and career shifts, I'll walk alongside you to better understand how to lean into your own intuition for guidance and support. My name is Dr. Alaina Puff, school psychologist turned intuitive coach, and I'll be guiding you through this adventure as I share my personal and professional experiences on how I learned to tap into my own intuition and how this changed my life forever.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Trust Your Gut podcast. I'm Dr. Alaina Puff, and I'm going to be your host today. Today, I am joined by a wonderful guest. I have Gina Matteo here with me, and Gina is a wonderful member of our community, and I am just so excited to have you here today to talk more about your gifts and your business.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, no problem. Let's go ahead and learn a little bit more about Gina before we jump into today's episode. Gina is the founder of Uncommon Babe. She is an intuition mentor and intuitive energy healing practitioner. She is dedicated to helping women step into their power and trust their intuition so that they can reclaim their unique authenticity and create a life in full alignment with their soul's truest desires, regardless of society's expectations. She is also the co-host of Dear Higher Self podcast and community dedicated to covering all things related to spirituality and self-development. So beautiful. Thank you, Gina, again, for taking time out of your day to be here with us. So excited to have you.
Same.
Oh, man. So I feel like we have a lot to cover today. You and I have a lot of overlap. And so I'm just going to cut to the chase here and jump into things. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your journey that has led you up until this point as far as stepping into your own spiritual beliefs and kind of realigning with your intuition? I'm always curious how people find themselves kind of on these trajectories. So can you take us back in time of where that really began?
Oh, yes. How much time do we have? Just kidding. No, for me, I feel like growing up, I was always pretty intuitive, but I didn't learn to trust myself for a long time. I didn't realize that that's what was happening. I think when you're intuitive and you can sense things, I'm also an empath. I realized that pretty early on too. So I was able to pick up a lot more information that I didn't realize other people weren't also picking up equally. And then where the trust came into play, I feel like the surroundings of the people that were in my life growing up, when you know things that you're feeling that you're not necessarily supposed to know, people aren't going to come right out and validate those things for you and make you trust yourself and build that trust muscle to go, oh, I know what I'm talking about. Because when you're calling things out and saying things that people don't necessarily want you to know or don't yet know for themselves, that they could be honest with themselves about it. It was like I was getting a lot of misinformation back to me. So I was like, okay, I must not be intuitive then. And it wasn't until many years later that down the road, people would come back to me and be like, oh, yeah, you were right about that, and I would get the feedback later. And so I finally realized after many years, not until my 20s, I was like, okay, I've actually been really intuitive this whole time, but you guys are making me think that I was just like getting these weird feelings that maybe were coming from like insecurity, or it usually was things that were trying to keep me safe. That's usually where my intuition has been strong in my upbringing. And yeah, the feedback threw me off for a little while, but eventually I was able to figure out that I actually was knowing the things.
Yeah.
And I learned to build that trust muscle. So it just took some time to come full circle for it to be like, oh, wait, I do know things.
Yeah, no, I wanna follow up on that because I want to talk about little girl Gina because I'm very curious at what that, I think for a lot with my specialty being with intuitive children, I spend a lot of time thinking about and coaching parents on how to validate and nurture their child's intuition and how intuition is really this heritable trait. So usually if you have this really intuitive child, at least one, if not both of the parents are also highly intuitive. And so, if you could share maybe in a little bit more detail, what was little Gina doing? What did she know that she shouldn't have known?
Oh my goodness. Well, I feel like so I grew up in an Italian East Coast family. So I'm from Arizona, but my family is from New York, and everybody moved out to Arizona. So even though I was here in Arizona where the vibe's a little different, I was being raised by mostly women who had this like Italian East Coast vibe to them. So the vibe in the family, and because we're Italian, everybody was very close. So even though I'm an only child and I grew up just my mom and I in the household, we were very close with the extended family. So it was everyone was around most of the time anyway. So large family. But the vibe wasn't warm and fuzzy and how do you feel and let's talk about it and let's peel back the layers. It was kind of straight to the point and direct and brash. And I think for me growing up in that environment, I picked up on a lot of that just because that's what was modeled to me. But at the same time, there was this emotional, empathic, intuitive person who was getting all this extra information, but didn't really have like the guidance of anybody to like lean into that with me and like peel that back. And so it was just kind of something that I think I navigated on my own until I was probably in middle school, where I met a best friend of mine who was similar to me, and we could have those deep conversations and we could peel it back and talk about all those things. But really up until then, it was just me kind of navigating it on my own because it was just not the vibe of the families. I think now we live in a different time where I think parents are more open to that, but or family members or whomever. But it was just, my mom and I, and she was working all the time and, trying to, keep a roof over our heads and do all the things. And so there wasn't a lot of bandwidth by no fault of her own for her to be like, oh, you're extra sensitive. Like there's things that you're picking up on. Let's sit and talk about it.
Yeah, I can so deeply. I also grew up in I'm an only child as well and grew up in a single parent household with my mom. So we have that similarity. And she too did not have the emotional bandwidth or space to be able to nurture my own intuitive qualities. And so I think it's really been interesting. And I don't know if you've had this conversation even with your mom as an adult, but like going back and educating them on what it means to be intuitive and really seeing that they are as well, but never had the space or capacity to really explore that. I found like the intergenerational part of this work is so powerful because we are connected by our ancestral lineage. Like it's not coincidental that we are this way. I don't know if you've had a chance to kind of explore that at all.
Oh yes. So my mom is definitely intuitive. I feel like, so through leaning into my intuition, I've also unlocked my psychic abilities. And that was something that I even had as a little girl that was happening in tandem with just like the knowings of the people around me. But then there was also some like paranormally kind of things that were happening quite often around me as well. So there was kind of two aspects of this sixth sense, so to speak, at play. And that roots all the way back through our lineage, especially with the women, actually even the men in our family. So not that anybody was like a practicing psychic or medium or anything like that, but there are lots of stories growing up of, my great grandmother seeing things, hearing things, knowing things, my uncle seeing things, hearing things, knowing things, my mom waking up in the middle of the night and knowing that somebody passed away and then the phone rings. So it's it wasn't part of like their personality. They weren't walking around being like, oh yeah, like we're psychics, we know things. It was just like this random thing that would happen and be like, oh wow, that was weird, on with the day.
Yeah.
So it was peppered in to our family lineage, but not anything that anybody was really embodying or taking seriously or leaning into. Whereas me over here in this lifetime, I'm like, I have all the questions. I want to lean all the way in. I want to go all the way down the rabbit hole, and I want to know how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. That curiosity and inquisitive nature is a gift, and I think you're the step in the lineage that gets to really explore that. I'm really curious. I work with kids who are psychic, and a lot of them communicate, it's scary for a lot of them because these experiences are really unexplainable in a lot of circles, modern circles, I should say. What was that like navigating that as a kid? Do you remember being like fearful of things, and how did you kind of navigate that as a younger person?
Yes, very much so. I slept in my mom's bedroom, I think, until I was like 10 or 11. I was like deathly afraid of the dark. I remember like I'd shut the light in my bedroom and like crawl into hers because I like could not be in the dark. And yeah, there were weird things that were happening all the time that, the dark is where it scared me the most, but in just the day to day, I guess, when the lights were on and it was just living normal life and weird things would happen, it was like kind of scary, but also exciting. But because the lights were on, I wasn't as scared. There's just something about the dark that I feel like unlocks more like of the darker things.
Right.
But whereas when it's light, I don't get as nervous. But I just assumed growing up, other people were also experiencing these weird circumstances. And it wasn't until I think I eventually got feedback that it was like, you have a lot of those stories. Like, those things don't happen to me. It's like, oh, they don't? I thought this was normal.
Yeah.
No?
I can so deeply relate to that. I have had so many of those experiences over the last like 5 or so years where I'm just like, oh, I just thought this was commonplace. I think for so many of us intuitives, like we just assume everybody is having this universal experience until someone checks you and is like, no, like this is unique to you. And you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. I had coffee with somebody I met in a networking event who was also starting to dive into her psychic abilities. This was just recently, and we both were talking about our childhoods. And we were both like ping-ponging back and forth of like, oh, this happened. Oh, this happened to me too. And we were able to validate so much of what we had experienced as kids. And it was making me remember some things that I had kind of forgotten about. And it was just so validating for somebody else to experience that. Because I think as you get older and as time goes by, you think back and you're like, was that just my imagination? Like, did that really happen? I don't, And so to have somebody be like, no, that definitely happened to me too. Oh, okay. So this is definitely there. Got it.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences where just like being in community with other people who can really understand, your lived experiences and validate those, like you said, it's incredibly healing, and cathartic in many ways. So I'm really glad that you've been able to full circle it back from being the kid that was afraid of the dark to really standing in your light, because I think that's really the pillar of your business is like being in your full authenticity and the highest version of yourself. And so the juxtaposition between those two images are powerful. And so I was wondering if you could kind of share, you talked about your 20s kind of being a time where you were really starting to step into your power, really uncover who you really are. Can you share just like what those experiences, some of the experiences that led to where you are now that really, trademarked that time?
Yeah. So because I wasn't trusting my intuition up until right around that point, a lot of what was my guiding light, because really your intuition should be what your guiding light is, and that's where you should be using as your compass. But because that wasn't what I was using and trusting, it was more coming from this place of, instead of the inside, it was from the outside. So I was looking, the more that I think about it, it's been a little bit of both, where it's like I kind of got halfway there with my intuition, but at the end of the day, I put my compass in the hands of others of, I want to do this, but does this work for you? Does this ruffle the feathers for everyone around me? How does everyone else feel about, do you guys need anything? Because I'm going to put you first and then do me. Like, I know what I want intuitively, like it's there, but at the end of the day, I just need to make sure that because I'm a people pleaser, that everybody else is happy and they have what they need and they're okay with my choices. And that got me into a lot of trouble. So even though I was choosing things that now I see in hindsight were in alignment, it was grounded in the wrong, it was coming from the wrong place. And so I got very burnt out. Happened right around the time that COVID was happening. So when I had got COVID, and it was like everything came to a head at that time in 2020, where I was just at the brink of really too much people pleasing in my corporate job, in my relationship with my family, with my friends, and serving myself last, that it all just like came crashing down. And I had long COVID for like a year and a half. And part of me was like, is this long COVID or is this just me recovering from burnout? And then I remember reading articles just about burnout in general and how that can take like 3 to 5 years sometimes to recover from. And I believe that. So I still jury's out on which one it was, or maybe it was a braided combination of the both. But 2020, 2021 was very, at this point, actually, it was my 30s. So there's been steps of like mini rock bottoms, but that was like the most epic one that like broke the whole thing open. And with everything, you know, just falling apart from burnout at that time, I had no choice but to step into my power and take my power back. And learning in that moment too that I had been ignoring my intuition for far too long and giving away my power for far too long. And that's what had got me into that position. And it was so hard in the moment, but it forced me to heal those things. It forced me to trust my intuition. It's now why I'm here running the business that I run and on this podcast with you. If it wasn't for those experiences, I wouldn't be in this field doing what I'm doing. So I'm grateful for it. It served me well, but gosh, in the moment did it suck. And it took a long time to learn that. So like I said, like through my 20s, it was kind of these like mini rock bottoms that happened. I wasn't fully learning from them. I was like kind of learning from them, but not fully getting it until that in 2020 happened. And then it was like, oh, yeah, okay. We broke it so badly. We can't skate by doing this anymore. I have to step into my power. I have to listen to my intuition. And since then, I complete 180 of life, complete different. I'm operating from a different place, and because of that, everything is intentional. And because it's intentional, and because the boundaries are there, like the happiness level has skyrocketed, like genuinely.
Yeah.
And now I just want everybody to be able to feel this. So like that's why I'm on this mission, to teach other women how to tap into their intuition, step into their power, because it's quite literally life-changing.
Yeah, it's so powerful listening to you share your testimony around your story. And I'm just like feeling it so deeply because it overlaps. It's so eerily similar to mine. You know, in the early episodes of this podcast, I share about, you know, my proverbial rock bottom came when I graduated with my doctorate back in 2022. And from there, it has been just like this return back to my intuition in a way that has transformed every facet of my life. And it sounds like we're running parallels there. And, you know, I kind of want to follow up kind of in what you shared, because something really resonated with me around, you know, from a psychological standpoint, I'm always thinking about profiles of people. Like, what are some qualities that unite us that we all kind of are having more or less a similar shared experience? So like in this case, if I may, you're a smart girl, clearly, because you've been able to make so many career shifts and you're able to run a successful business. You're smart. You're very intuitive. You described yourself as like this really empathetic, like deep feeling person. You're well adjusted, like you were able to go on and like get your degree and do your things and like pretty much go off without a hitch. And then there's also this element of people pleasing and like self sacrifice that comes with that, of like wanting to engage in endeavors to please external outlets and family members or whatever it may be. It's kind of this perfect recipe for us women. And I see this all the time with the clients that I work with. And I was this woman too. So no shade here whatsoever. But these women who are too well adjusted for our own good, like we are so good at everything. And that's not coming from a conceited place, but we're able to really put on these masks to the world and really suppress our own intuitive knowing for an extended period of time. Like mine was 30 plus years. And I feel like what happens is that it all comes to a head eventually. Like you can't sustain that forever. I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, I think we can also add to that list of character traits is strength and resilience. It's like every time I would get knocked back down, I would get right back up and keep moving on. And so I think that's why it took me several times to like really get the hint from the universe of what it was trying to teach me, because it just dusted myself. I mean, not to say that it wasn't hard. It was hard at the moment, but I dusted myself back off and got up and kept doing the dang thing. So I think that's part of it too, that when you're strong, you can wear the masks for longer because you don't break as easily. And the breaking is where the magic happens. It's like you have to break apart so you could build something new and something isn't working.
Wow, I got chills when you said that. Sometimes you have to break for the magic to come through and forward. And strength and resilience, you're absolutely correct, because I think other people who, might really be put in positions to surrender sooner rather than later are more likely to probably have their awakening and have that experience. Whereas, I love to pride myself as being a little bit stubborn. I needed the universe's 2x4 to the head a few times to be like, wake
my
up,
gosh, yeah.
wake up.
Yeah,
I know for a lot of folks, a lot of particularly women that I speak with, they talk about people pleasing as being one of their character flaws, something they really struggle with. Can you speak a little more directly on your road to recovery as far as being a people pleaser and how maybe intuition has helped contribute to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like where it finally clicked for me is I didn't really see people pleasing as a bad thing, and it wasn't until I started learning about what codependency was that it clicked. The two of them, I guess, well, let me back up and say I didn't really understand what that word meant, codependency. Like, to me, I had initially, when I heard it just kind of haphazardly around, my orbit, was that I just figured that it was something that when you were like dependent on another person. And I didn't realize that there were kind of two sides to the coin, because in my mind I was like, I don't need anyone's help. Like, I'm super independent. Like, I'm not coded. I'm good. Like, I can lone wolf it and be fine if I need to. Don't want to, but I can. So, like, I'm not codependent. And it wasn't until as I was going through therapy and navigating a pretty toxic relationship that I realized that what it actually meant and what, like, the other side of the coin was, and how you, like, cater too much to people and, like, abandon yourself and your own need. I was like, oh, that's what it means. And then it became something deeper that I needed to look at versus, like, I don't know, people pleasing to me just felt like it was like a cute little, like, adjective to describe myself, and I didn't really see it as a problem for the longest time. It just felt like it was like, oh yeah, I'm a people pleaser. Anyway, like, it wasn't hitting that it was something that I, like, really needed to look at or connect the dots at how much it was impacting my life. I just didn't get it for the longest time.
So what did that really look like? Because I feel like that's, even I call myself a recovering people pleaser all the time, and definitely had to play in the realms of codependency. And, that's been a critical part of my own healing journey. And I feel like it's one that I will walk forever. Like, I always feel myself, like, kind of wanting to slip back into that comfort zone when I get into, like, high conflict situations or have to confront somebody that I care about. How do you navigate that now as you're walking your own journey?
I had to really learn what boundaries were. That was never really modeled to me capacity growing up. So I did not know how to have them or how to hold them. And it was something that I had to retrain myself in. So I did a lot of reading and practicing, and still to this day, like you, I would want to slide back and just be like, okay, whatever you need, because this is uncomfortable and I hate conflict. Like,
same.
It takes practice. It really, like, even with a built muscle, it still takes practice to hold those boundaries. But in order to hold the boundary or know what boundary it is that you even need to have, you have to be able to tap into your intuition enough to go and check in and flip from operating from this external view of what's going on outside of you, and flip it inwardly and go, okay, how am I feeling? What's going on? What do I need? Where's my intuition guiding me right now? And then flipping back into the outside world, going, okay, actually, this is what I need. This is my boundary, and here's how it needs to go, or I gotta go. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think it's an iterative, ongoing journey. I think a lot of people are like, when I talk with them, they expect it to be like a flip of the switch, like instantly, I'm fixed.
Like riding a bike.
No, it's not that simple, or else we'd all be good right now. And not have to talk about this anymore. But that's just not the reality with these types of embedded traits. And I think for me, one thing that I really had to unpack was, like, the generational lineage of where the people pleasing came from, because it's not, so much of, like, what comes up for us isn't just ours. It's our parents, our grandparents, our great
down.
Yeah, it's all embedded and passed down in these generational patterns. And so Even things that, I remember when I was starting my business about a year ago, things that were activations that were coming through around like I was being triggered by stuff and really overwhelmed. And I was like, wait a second, like this isn't even mine. Like this is not anything that is resonant within my own body. Where is this coming from and how do I get rid of it? So it's multifaceted in a lot of ways. And I think that makes it a little bit tricky. And so to be able to have people like you and I who are kind of traversing across the planes, I'll call them, to help people and guide them in a way that feels most aligned, I think is absolutely necessary moving forward. So with that, we got you in 2020, kind of, the epic rock bottom, you called it.
Yes.
Really feeling those symptoms of burnout. Was burnout primarily contributed from your work environment, or it sounds like it was kind of relational and work related?
Everything came to a head at once. The universe was like, we're done playing with one category at a time. We're going to make them all apart, and you're going to learn the lesson in every single category, and then you'll figure it out. And I did.
It's beautiful. I mean, it's heartbreaking and beautiful all at once. So if you could share, I mean,
It was the worst, best experience of my life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Is that kind of where the business came in, or can you share with us kind of the up leveling that had to come from that, the phoenix rising from the ashes?
That's exactly what it was. The business came out of that. I knew that I wanted to I was so into spirituality at the time that I knew I wanted to be in that world. It's like, what's that going to look like? Well, I'm very passionate about intuition. It's kind of toying with a couple different options, but ultimately where it netted out was the exact roadmap that I used to get myself out of that rock bottom and to following my intuition and creating a life that was very intentional and in full alignment with who I was. I built a program around. So if I didn't go through that experience, that program wouldn't have came out of it, and that was the genesis of my business. So really, before I even had a community or a following on social media, I built this 10-week program because I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, what am I even going to offer the world? What am I going to talk about? And so I just went down a rabbit hole of like, okay, well, this is the roadmap that I took to rebuild my life from the ground up in a way that was authentic to me, which I had to figure out what that meant,
right,
to relearn that. And then, how to follow my intuition. And then, okay, how do you roadmap now that you have the foundation? How do you build something from there? So
beautiful. Walk us through that 10 weeks. Like, what are some of the key tenets that you really showcase in that program? I'm so curious.
Well, it all starts with knowing who you are. Because if you don't know who you are, like, what are you creating from? So it's like you have to get down to the roots of who you are. And I'm very interested in quantum science and this all being a holographic universe and whatnot. And so it really is this compilation of all the different areas of study that I have done between like the science of things and spirituality and bridging it together. And the way that this whole program is themed is around how life is a lot like a video game, and the way that you would like choose your character when you're playing like Mario Kart or The Sims is very similar here on Earth when you're playing this character. So like I came down to Earth and decided I was going to play Gina, and the way that like you would pick, who you're going to be in Mario Kart and what their skills are and stuff, like that's inherently built into you. So it's once you can uncover that, now you know like who your character is, who you're playing with. So we first start off with like, who's your character? It's all kind of video game themed. So then in the second level of the game, because they're not modules, they're levels, we learn our intuition, because your intuition is like your guide. So if sometimes I'm not even a gamer, but the analogy just makes sense. But when you play a game and you have that guide or the narrator who's like, okay, here's what you've got to go and do, and you go from here and go talk to this person because they're going to give you this, and that's how you get to the next level. Well, that's your intuition. They're guiding you through your life. So now that you know who you are, here's what you go and listen to. It's your intuition. And then from there, we'll kind of go into like the different cheat codes of how the universe works and the energetics behind it and quantum science and how to use the way if you know how the universe works, why not use it to get all the things that are in alignment for you? So we learn manifestation and shadow work, and I have a corporate background in project management. So we're essentially We're not just ideating of what we want the life to be like. We are actually mapping it out and essentially project planning your life back into alignment.
Beautiful. I love the action-oriented piece of that because a lot of programs that I've seen out there are very just like, it's very heady based and like very cognitive oriented, but then doesn't actually translate into any actionable goal directed steps. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. I mean, it's really easy to talk about all this kind of up in the etheric, but not actually be able to translate that into like the 3D world that's around you. So I love that you're incorporating, your corporate project management background into the beautiful aligned work that you're doing now. That's so cool.
Well, that came from me knowing who I was, the like level 1 that I teach. It was like I had to get down to brass tacks of like, who am I? What are my innate skills? What am I good at? And that was just one of them. So it was like once I drew the through line through all of those core values, things, skill sets, this is what came out of it. And that's why it's aligned, because it's like now, like most of myself and then the people that I serve, we're in like our 30s. So you have enough data at this point to draw from, to go, okay, here's like kind of naturally what I've been good at. Here's what I'm drawn to. This is just innately who I am. And when you can draw a line through all of those, boom, like that's it. You just have to connect the dots. We should figure out what the dots are. And then I help you with that.
Yeah. I'm curious the types of clients that have come in to engage in the program. Are you finding that it's a lot of folks, you mentioned folks primarily in their 30s, who are trying to recover from burnout, who are kind of just hitting that proverbial rock bottom, that epic rock bottom that we were kind of talking about before? Who's really stepping into this work that you see?
It's a little bit of both. It's net, it's mostly people who are looking for clarity, who are still trying to figure out what they want. So it could just be in a place where this is just okay, but I know it's not, there's something more for me and I don't quite know what that is, or I have all these ideas and I don't know where to start from. Or it's somebody who's like, I'm done, I'm gonna burn it down, but I'm scared because that's intense, and when I burn it down, then what?
Yeah.
So you can kind of have two sides of the coin there. It's like a level up or like level it out to level up.
I love a good burn it down methodology, if I do say so myself. I've done that a few times in my life, and talk about beautiful and heartbreaking.
Well, it's interesting as I think back on the times that I've burnt it down. My story for a little while was, it was the life that I thought I should live versus now I created the life that is in alignment. And really, when I step back and look at the two of them together, they're actually pretty similar. But it goes back to what I was speaking about earlier in that it was coming from a different place. So it was like I had kind of the right pieces on the board, but where I was operating it from was what was draining me and why that like sustainable happiness wasn't there. So it was like I was following my intuition halfway, but because of where it was coming from, the lack of boundaries and the people pleasing, it was like I couldn't sustain what I was creating.
Right. Yeah. It's all about the frequency in which you're operating at. So if you're at this lower frequency where you're like bending over backwards for people and not being able to, protect your own energy, then yeah, you can be living an aligned life, but it's coming at a huge cost. Whereas it sounds like you've really ascended into a higher frequency of existence on this planet. And with that, you're able to, I'm sure, and you could speak to this as well, your work is probably so much more potent now and impactful. I know I have seen that in my own client-based work. Is the work that I'm doing now is like chef's kiss compared to what it was a few years ago, because it's coming at this higher frequency that isn't taxing or draining. Do you see that with yours as well?
I mean, yeah, I see it in every aspect of my work and the way that I live my life. And I think you're right in what you're saying about the frequency. So I've become so obsessed with learning about energy at this point, because your insides it's the like remote controller. It's the antenna. It sets the tone for what you see on the outside. So it really is like the remote control. You're programming from the inside what you are going to see through your eyeballs and experience on this journey. So unless you can get in control of what you're thinking about and how you're feeling, like that sets the exact tone for what you're going to experience on the outside. So it doesn't matter what pieces you put into place unless you're operating from a grounded and aligned, happy place, you're going to get back that. So if what's going on the inside isn't lovely, you're going to get not lovely on the outside.
100%.
And I had to learn that the hard way. And I'm just obsessed with the science behind it. I think it's really interesting. It feels like a hack. It feels like a cheat code to life. So I've definitely incorporated it into my program, even more so than originally, because I'm like, no, this is really, like, it's the cheat code. Once you can crack this, like, that's it. Game over. Like, anything you desire, go for it.
It's possible. I know. I
Yeah.
definitely described that my experience. Like, for me, it feels like collapsing time. Like, I feel like I've taken what should take me 25, 30 years, I've done in 2. And, I joke with my friends, friends who live out of state. We do catch-up calls and, we're, hey, how's it been? It's been a few weeks or it's been a few months. And I always say, like, I can't wait when I have nothing to share with you, or all we could talk about is the weather or something like arbitrary, because every time it's like, I had this amazing realization drop in, I'm pivoting in my business, I'm doing this in my personal life. Like, it just expedites everything because it's cutting through the BS of it all.
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually just talking about this on my own podcast, because when you are elevating your frequency, the frequency is higher at higher frequencies, which means it's faster.
Yes.
So it like compounds at a faster rate.
Yes.
So you're pivoting faster, you're transitioning faster, you're up leveling faster. It all just happens so much quicker. And I think that's why, as a collective, we're seeing more changes faster, because as a collective, we're raising our frequency. So when you start doing the work, it gets exponentially faster and faster, that you can just like shed and move on to the next thing and shed and like grow, and it's awesome.
It's the wildest experience.
Time.
It is, yeah. No, I could definitely. Like, sometimes I'm just like, oh man, I can't get off the train. Like, I'm on the treadmill running at this point, and there's no getting off, because I think it's like, once you experience it, there's no going back, right? I did want to ask you some questions around specifically intuition, because I feel like, considering myself like an intuitive coach, in my own work, I really am always curious how folks kind of conceptualize intuition, because I think it's a term that often gets thrown around quite a bit and misused. And I think, just for the sake of clarity and continuity, like, I always, am curious how people are kind of playing with that, because I think it's important that as a collective, we have a general understanding, even though everybody's intuitive guide and knowing is going to look a little bit different. Understanding like what that conceptually really represents for us as humans. And so one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was a big question that I get from folks is, around discernment with their intuition. So a lot of people will come to me and be like, how do I know the difference between like maybe an intrusive thought, or even just a general thought in my head, versus an intuitive ping? How do you help folks navigate that? Because that is like one of the most common questions I get.
Yeah, it's a loaded question. I feel like the more practice that you get with it, the faster that you can do it. But when you're just starting to build your muscle with your intuition, it takes slowing down and peeling back the layers of it. So when you have this thought that you're like, was that intuition, or was it, my ego? Was it fear? Where is this coming from? You have to actually stop and think through it and peel back the layers. Whereas like, as you get going with it, sometimes it happens almost immediate, but when you're building that muscle, it takes like maybe a journaling session, or maybe, for me, I always like to process out loud in my car. I'll go for a drive and just talk out loud. Be like, okay, I had this thought and this is how I'm feeling. Is this, and then I'll just start asking asking myself questions about it, to start peeling back the layer of like, okay, does this thought come from a place that's keeping me small, or is it there to help me grow? And I'll just get curious and I'll start picking at it and asking it questions. And then through those questions and answerings, I'm listening to what my gut is saying. And sometimes I'll even catch myself in a lie, especially if I'm like talking out loud, or like not in a lie, but like I don't even know how to explain it, where it's not, your gut calls you out and you're like, oh, I don't know if that was like, it sounded like it was going to come out right, but my gut just told me that actually wasn't the most truth for myself. And so I'll listen for that as well. So you could do it through journaling, or you could do it through talking out loud, but that's my favorite way to just like focus on something. And I still have to do that from time to time when it's the bigger, more convoluted kind of things that I'm navigating through. I'm like, all right, this is a lot and I've got a lot of mixed feelings on it. And I just start question and answering and seeing, and just not judging it. I just observe it for what it is, and interview, and I become a detective of myself. this is keeping, but I think, okay, so net to make it, I kind of went in a little bit of a circle here. To keep it simple, the two questions, I think there's two here, I'm riffing now, is this keeping me small or is it helping me grow? That's a good one. And am I doing this for love or from love? I heard that. I gotta say, I don't know who said that. I learned that somewhere and I don't know who to give credit to. I can't remember, but it stuck with me. Yeah. And it's, am I doing it for love, or am I thinking about this in a way because I want to receive love, or because I like genuinely love this and want to do it? So depending on what the circumstances is, I feel like those two are the ones that lead me to the most correctness. And you just have to be honest with yourself. That really is what intuition is predicated upon, is being radically honest with yourself. Absolutely. Even if you don't like the answer.
Oh my God, so beautiful. I mean, it overlaps on kind of my explanation in so many ways, because to your point, the stillness is step one usually of just like slow your ass down. Two is really coming from a place, like I refer to it as like neutrality. Like intuition is a neutral experience, just like shifting into neutral in the car, same principle, right? And so I feel like when you're coming from a place of fear or anxiety, that is not a neutral experience. It doesn't show up in your body in a neutral experience. You likely will have sensations and like feel really uncomfortable. And that's how I kind of been able to hone in my own discernment around it. And I think those questions are beautiful to add to that repertoire. But when you truly get an intuitive ping and you start building that muscle, like you said, it comes with this level of certainty and neutrality where you just know that you know that you know. And you're like, I don't even know how I know, but I know. And that, trusting that, like you said, like that radical acceptance and trust of like, I'm the best navigator for my life. There is no one out there better to do this than me, for me. That's absolutely beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, it comes in fast. It's your ego, your fears, all those things, they linger. They're long. But your intuition is just like, hey, no, or hey, yes. And like, that's it. It's quick, it's still, and then
comes all the anxiety.
That's the data point.
Like, wow, I'm about to do this crazy thing and I can't unsee it. So I guess I'm going to do it now.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I feel like sometimes your intuition and your emotions, your ego, etc., will see eye to eye. So like your intuition will be like, nope. And then your fear starts like unraveling. And it's like, oh my God, of course we can't do this. And it's like, well, they're in alignment. So then it gets tricky because you're like, well, who am I supposed to believe? Well, they're both saying the same thing. But then in other cases, you have this quick little like, no, that's a no for you. Like, this isn't good. And then you have your ego on the other hand who thinks it's something different. And so you have to kind of be able to like look at them separately, which means like pulling it back and looking at the data between the two. Because either way, it's data. That's how I like to refer to all the things that go on inside of yourself, whether it's a sensation, a thought, a feeling, a gut knowing. It's all just data. And you're the person that observes it. So you pull back and look at it for what it is, and then just discern from there. It has to be not so personal.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's the neutrality of it. And you're playing to my social scientist right now where I'm like a data nerd. So I definitely appreciate that. I wanted to follow up another question that I get a lot. And this is actually, I would say this is pretty controversial of a topic, but I really just want to go there because I think it's important to talk about. I often hear people talk about intuition being universal in the sense that we all are gifted this level of intuition. I'm wondering what your thoughts around that are as far as how you harness and nurture that in your clients, because I feel like this is pretty divisive. Either people are like, everyone's gifted with this or not. What are your thoughts?
I think we all have the biological hardware to have that skill set. And I think for some of us, we're just kind of like genetically born into having it come a little bit more natural, or by way of our nurture, we get forced into hypervigilance, which is a very similar muscle that makes us become intuitive because of our surroundings around us. So there's that. There's people who've had more practice with it, but I think being a human, everyone has the ability to have it. It's just whether or not you've had more practice with it or not. But regardless, you can strengthen that muscle. So whether you have had more practice with it growing up, You're just a little bit ahead of the curve. You have a stronger muscle, but you can continue to build that, versus if you're starting with like no muscle with it at all, you can build that up from there. So anybody can become an expert at it, in my opinion.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's definitely, I think where I stand is, I look at it from a scientific data. I think of like a bell curve. And, you think about a standard bell curve, there's going to be people who generally fall in that average range. Majority will. But I think there's some who are gifted, who are just really like naturally wired, not just to be intuitive, but to lead the way in which you and I are in our own respective domains, right? That's kind of like how I perceive, and like we are going to gravitate in certain people. But I definitely think intuition is something that could be nurtured across the board, like you said. I think to create a business around it and dedicate your life to it requires a special combination of the two that you just described. And so I love connecting with people who are kind of on that similar journey, and even just hearing your story today and the overlap that it has with just my story as well, and the story of others that I've heard really validates those experiences.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I do feel like it was all meant to be. All of the circumstances through my journey have led me here for a reason, so I can teach this, which meant I had to not be very good at it in the beginning.
100%. No, I agree. How do you perceive intuition playing a role kind of in this idea? I think as we're in this transition on this planet, on Earth, like welcoming in these, for me, I get really excited about the kids that are coming onto this planet right now, this next generation.
Oh yeah, they're a different breed.
Oh yeah, I could spend a whole another hour talking about that, but we're seeing these kids come on, who are more open and clear than ever before. People like you and I really stepping into our power to lead others towards the light. How do you think intuition fits into that kind of narrative as far as what we're trending towards with this new Earth and everything?
I mean, I think these kids that are coming in nowadays are more tapped into it. I would love to study more about how, from a scientific perspective, this evolution is happening, of why they seem to be they're coming in just naturally expanded and at a higher frequency. But I think they're embodying more of the way that we as humans are supposed to be living our lives, of just following our intuition and our highest excitement and letting that be what guides us on the day-to-day, instead of, I mean, a lot of the society that we live in right now is you do a lot of things you don't want to do. If I wake up and I don't feel like going to work today, or running my business, or doing whatever, or, taking the client that I had booked, like, you are a jerk if you don't go do that, and you're going to get in trouble, and there's consequences. And so it's like, we don't right now live in a society that allows us to just be floating from thing to thing just by way of our intuition. And I feel like these kids are coming in here by way to reset the tone of what the world is going to look like, because they are tenacious in their desire for, I'm going to do what I want to do. And I know it's infuriating, so much of the older generation, like, these kids coming in here, acting like that, but I see that side of it, but I'm also like, it's going to change everything, and I can't wait to be an old lady in my rocking chair. Like, yes, like, I wish I would have had my youth during this time.
I love it. These are the burn it down generation kids. I mean, they're really about to break the system, and I'm here for it. And I think it's so exciting to watch and like think of, and work with parents and talk about, how to nurture that and how to really give them a strong skill set, just like we began this episode talking about as children, as our own childhood experiences. Like, that's where these skills are really critical to pour into. And so I think they're here to heal this planet in a really big and potent way. And so it's so exciting that even the work that we're doing with adults, that trickles down into the people who are going to be nurturing and taking care of these kids. And so it's super exciting. Super exciting.
Yeah, the parents these days, they have a hard job for themselves because the world is changing so fast. And I know it's kind of like that for every generation, but because we're speeding up our frequency and elevating as a collective, it's even faster now. So I feel like we're trying to raise these kids in a way that we know best from our generation, but it's like things are going to be so different when they're on their own and out in the wild. And it's like, how do you prepare for a child for something that you personally have never experienced? Like, you can only prepare them to like at your best of only what you know. I think it's going to help them kind of bridge into the transition of where things are going to go with the quote unquote new earth. But it's a challenge for these new parents.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely in service to those folks, and we're all figuring it out the best we can right now with what we have, just like every generation before us. So, I want to transition into your business a little bit. So, the name of your business, Uncommon Babe. Talk to me about the name. I'm so curious.
Yeah. So it really just derives from this sense of stepping into your authenticity and your power and your own uniqueness. By doing so, you're your own uncommon babe. Everyone is so unique. At the same time, we're so similar to one another, but each of us has our own energetic fingerprint, our own, I like to compare it to like the color hex codes where you're like picking colors in Photoshop or Canva. Like there's a bazillion versions of blue, but everyone has their own little hex number next to it that makes up what that color blue is. And that's kind of like our own energetic fingerprint. And so, it's really just modeled around stepping into your own version of what an uncommon babe means to you and embodying who you are. And I'm very excited about the name. I love it.
It's so cool. I love it. It's really powerful. And when I first read it, I was like, I just need to know more. This is so potent and powerful. With that, you mentioned in the bio, the Dear Higher Self podcasting community. Can you speak a little bit more about maybe what you showcase on that show and some of the discussions that if people want to jump over there and take a listen?
Yeah, so it's all centered around connecting with your higher self and following your intuition, which I could talk about all day, every day, hence the podcast. So all the different things of just talking about, figuring out who am I, why am I here, what's my purpose, how do I navigate this situation versus that situation, like the life's biggest questions that we have that we're always asking. It's what is covered on the podcast.
I love that. And then as far as upcoming offerings, can you share with our audience a little bit about where to find you and kind of some of the things that you have forecasting up ahead in the coming weeks and months?
Yeah, so best place to find me is on Instagram. I'm at uncommon _ babe. And that has links to the podcast and all the different offerings. So right now, for those that are in Arizona, I host Intuition Full Moon Circles every month in person. So hopefully, eventually we'll get those virtual as well. And then I offer intuitive psychic soul readings. So love doing those with clients. I read your energetic field and connect with your soul, your higher self, and can receive messages that help give people clarity in terms of what their soul is really craving or what might be holding them back, and what it's a little bit of a psychic reading and high level coaching mixed in one, and some energy healing because I'm reading each of the chakras and doing that. So it's a good place to start if you kind of want to jumpstart getting clarity. You're like, I could use some help. I'll listen to the podcast, maybe take a course, but just give me the answers now. It's the quick fix. So
I love that.
There's that offering. And then at the end of the year is when I release the program that we were talking about earlier, that 10-week program. It's called Dream Life Level Up. And it's really just all about navigating life in the matrix and creating a life intuitively aligned with who you are.
It's beautiful. What a lineup of things to look forward to. And I've been meaning to make it to one of your circles, so I'm putting it on my to-do list here for the next one because I've heard nothing but good things about those experiences. You really do a beautiful job of holding space. So if you're in Arizona, definitely check it out. Awesome. Well, Gina Matteo here with me from Uncommon Babe. Thank you so much again for connecting with me and sharing more about your passion and your journey. We are so grateful to have you as part of this community.
This was awesome. Thanks so much for having me. It's nice to find another person who's just as passionate about intuition as I am.
You're in the right place. All right, guys. Well, we're going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Trust Your Gut podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one.